probably could. You're not seeing the presenter view, are you?
Nope. I think, Tom, we want to hit top of the hour. We want to give people a few minutes.
Yeah, I think so. Just looking at who's here, I think we'll give it a minute or two. Looks like I'm having to admit a couple folks too.
Some familiar names there. Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll kick off in a minute. Okay. Well, I think we've got enough here to get started. It's after 1, so want to be respectful of everyone's time. But we certainly are appreciative of everyone joining us this afternoon to learn about the Azure VMware Solution, more commonly known as AVS, and really kind of why now is a good time to investigate this as an option. Before we jump into kind of the heart of the content, just want to give everyone a brief overview of who Emergent Software is in case you're not familiar. So my name is Tom Parker. I am the Director of Sales here at Emergent Software. We are a Microsoft Solutions partner, professional services organization, really focused on 3 core areas of business within that Microsoft space. What we're going to talk about today mainly falls within our cloud transformation practice. So what we mean by that is we're helping customers migrate from on-prem into Azure, helping customers take advantage of native Azure services, helping customers utilize PaaS services, and really kind of that core Microsoft 365 modern work and security space. We have folks with lots of tenure and experience helping customers kind of round out that Microsoft ecosystem. We do a lot of work within the software development stack as well, or within that space, helping customers refactor, modernize existing applications, create native net new SaaS applications. And with all those applications comes a lot of data. So we have a very large data engineering practice where we're helping customers set up data warehouses, data lakes, create a lot of heavy data engineering work, really, and all the way down to SQL DBA support. We've been doing this for a long time. We have 20 plus years experience across our consultants, hundreds of certifications, and many happy customers. But really, why we're here today and what we're here to talk about is kind of the impotence of the Broadcom acquisition of VMware. It's created, I'd say, a good amount of turmoil within the industry, and something that customers are really kind of asking a lot of questions as to what their options are moving forward. When we talk about some of that turmoil, I think it really comes down to what is the product going to look like moving forward? What is my support and service going to look like moving forward? And will we begin to see like degradation in those things? I think Broadcom has a track record of buying best-in-class software tools, and then slowly over time, we start to see a lack of product development, a lack of software support, and a lack of, I guess, just general service that gets applied to those tools. Not saying that VMware isn't a great tool or will continue to be, but I think over time the risk is that we'll start seeing less product enhancements and service support could go down. Another reason why you're probably here is around increased cost. If you haven't received your VMware renewal quote yet, the cost has likely gone up. Most instances, we're seeing that cost increase by 3 to 5%. In some cases, we're seeing, even upwards of 10% based on the product mix of that you guys are utilizing from VMware. And kind of gone are the days of you being able to acquire perpetual licenses on a 1-year commitment. We are now being forced into cloud-based agreements, cloud-based licensing models for 3-year and longer terms. So, the lack of flexibility, the increase in cost, really is one of the reasons why we're having a lot of conversations with our customer base on what their options are moving forward for that VMware environment. One other thing to call out that's somewhat of a compelling event. Microsoft, as you know, does offer reserved instances within Azure. In the past, they've offered 3-year and 1-year terms where you can lock in your costs for the duration of those terms. If you are considering reserved instances through the end of Microsoft's fiscal year, which is the end of June, they are offering a 5-year term. So something that would need to be acted upon fairly soon, but just know that that is an option out there if you've ever considered looking at reserved instances from Microsoft. So that's kind of the reason why we are here today. My colleague Charlie Sukup, who runs our cloud and data practice, is going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what we want to talk about here. Talk about why VMware on Azure, how we've seen other customers utilize the platform, what does that migration process look like, and some of the success stories that we've seen and some of the benefits that it's generated. So, Charlie, I will give you the floor.
Yeah, hey everybody, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right, Tom? Jeremy, you guys got me?
Yep.
All right, awesome.
Oh, hold on, I should note one thing. Sorry. If you do have a question, let's use the chat function. We have you guys all muted. So if you have a question, throw it in the chat and we will either get to that kind of as we see them or we'll address it at the end.
Cool. Yeah, so like Tom said, I'm going to walk through a few areas of, we talked about kind of some of the events going on that maybe have you thinking about, okay, what does my VMware consumption look like, short and long term. And I want to talk about why AVS should be maybe in the running for consideration. So one thing we talk a lot to customers about when, hey, I've invested a lot in maybe training my staff, ongoing upkeep, my entire virtualized environment is on VMware. I'm not ready to let that go. That's where, I'm not ready to retool or reskill my staff, at least yet. I want to keep, the tools I know and love for now. AVS is a great option for that. It's, cloud transformation without starting over. That knowledge applies. It's still the same tools that a lot of people know, vCenter, vSphere under the hood, HCX, NSX, things like that. So just by leveraging AVS, your skill sets still apply. The big difference is you're not building out your own clusters, right? You're not handling or needing to worry about, I need to buy the physical servers, I need to rack them, cool them, power them, connect them, all that piece. Really, the beauty of it is all that's taken care of, from the AVS solution, and you're at the hypervisor layer up, which is great. And we'll talk a little bit about how the speed of that too, right? So instead of procurement spec, physical hardware specs, what that all looks like, quickly extending your virtual infrastructure. We've seen, just having nodes provisioned in ready in less than a week. There's some configuration there, right? There's the networking you got to take care of and what that all looks like. But you can have your own virtual cluster of AVS nodes ready very quickly. I know the procurement pipeline isn't as dire as it was maybe during the COVID days, but ordering and procuring servers is at least a few week lead time there, probably just for that physical gear to arrive on a dock, let alone be out of box racked, configured, firmware, and starting to put vSphere on top of it. Speed, very important here. We've seen a couple instances of customers where maybe they had colo contracts coming up and they're like, hey, you know what? We're looking to get out of this pretty quick and dirty. We're not, looking to completely maybe transform or move workloads from SaaS to PaaS offerings and things like that, we just got to get off of our equipment. AVS is a great option. It's quick, it's up, you can start using it very quickly, and it's like for like moves. And lastly, DR simplified, right? The idea of, hey, I got to have like for like or very similar type geographically redundant facilities, that maybe I'm having to fly people around to handle some of the hands and feet potentially. This can be a great replacement for that. Configure DR in Azure. Don't need to manage that fully second data center. You're using you can pick in most cases the region that you want your AVS clusters to be. So if you're, I need this to be X amount of miles apart, East Coast, West Coast, whatever that might look like, those are all options on the table to get you that geographical redundancy in a DR scenario. And also, we've seen customers start with it being DR, right? And then whether they fail over and that becomes their prod environment, and then they build AVS clusters elsewhere, or they're migrating to more native Azure, there's options there that you can take advantage of. Kind of that, the musical chair cup game a little bit from a data center perspective. Also a very clean way to achieve those DR initiatives. Go ahead, Tom. Some of the other benefits, I mentioned this one a little bit, maximizing your VMware investment. You're keeping that knowledge, all that training time, all the years of experience coming up from, all the vSphere release versions. That's still what is there. You look at it, vCenter looks exactly the same. And you're also, taking advantage of Microsoft does a lot of those vSphere upgrades for you at the different layers, right? You're not having to go through and look at all the different runbooks and dependencies of what that looks like. That's part of the service that comes with it. Agility and scalability. You're adding hosts, private cluster, you're spinning them up. It's not like you need to make, I think about the days of running on-prem data center, and it's like, well, we need this to last us 3 years, so we better purchase upfront capacity now for our growth over the next 2 to 4 years. Okay, well, at first you're going to have unused capacity. Here you can scale to give yourself just enough capacity that you want, and then let's say you think, in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever that looks like, I'm going to need more. Well, you just make that procurement decision when you need it, when you need more, not upfront and making that long-term plan. You can plan for what I need now plus a little headroom, and then add as you go, so you're not making that big expenditure upfront for capacity that you think you'll need down the road, but you're not going to leverage right away. Security and compliance, right, top of everyone's mind these days. Leverage all of the security management that Microsoft provides through Azure Defender for Cloud. It's kind of a no-brainer. Sentinel, you can pipe your logs from your AVS clusters into Sentinel for log retention. For if you have some sort of SOC requirements, you can get it through there, along with other Microsoft logs you want to funnel in. We mentioned Critical Start there. They're a MSSP partner out there. If you need 24/7 eyes on glass, that they've leveraged there, that we have seen customers leverage, and to great success from a security and compliance standpoint. So you leveraging AVS allows you to tack on and leverage a lot of the surrounding tooling that the Azure cloud has to offer. And then just operational efficiency, right? We're talking about standard features, Azure AD, backups, all those things you know and love. And you can even extend, I think we'll talk about that in a minute. You can extend some of the Azure tool sets down into even your on-prem clusters to try and get that single pane of glass for management, whether you're running on-prem, whether you have a couple different AVS clusters potentially, as long as it's all in that VMware ecosystem, there's a lot of cool things you can do there, from hopefully ease of management for your IT team and system admins. Go ahead, Tom. So a big part, we're talking about expenses and potential license increases from the Broadcom acquisition. Opportunity to move from a CapEx to OpEx expenditure. I think about, your monthly fee, right? Going on however many nodes you have, that's what you pay for, versus, okay, I need to renew my licenses, I need to renew my support every so often. Different models to take advantage of. What does that look like? And then also the change from CapEx of buying that physical equipment and whatever else is needed to run a colo space to purely OpEx. Use what you pay for type approach. The overarching theme of Azure, AVS included, is hey, you use what you pay for each month. You scale up, it's more. You scale down, it's less. It's that simple. So you're never needing to over provision yourself in case of an event. You can do that on demand. Extending your data center, where expansion can take months, hardware lead times, things we've mentioned. We're talking very simple, very quick growth. A business event happens, and a business decision leader comes to the IT department and says, hey, this event is going on. We need to scale immediately, and it has to be ready in 6 weeks or less. That would be a pinch and potentially a very unrealistic time frame in a traditional data center setting. In a AVS cloud-based approach, that is well within reach, making that probably happen even ahead of the 6-week time frame, where you can have additional resources available at scale, provisioned, probably some networking to do, but ready within that time frame that you can go back and tell the business leads, hey, we're ready to go. Let's move on to the testing phase, or what's next. So that, again, scale up capacity is there. Talked about disaster recovery already. AVS is your VMware DR solution. I want to call out, we've seen it be a great fit for Horizon VDI clusters as well, whether that's a prod or a DR environment from a VDI cluster, just needing a place for those desktops to live, grow, scale, performance, redundancy, whatever it might be. Another great option for that. I know, especially from a licensing perspective, that's something we can help with. There's still requirements from a VDI side and what you do and don't have. But I remember when having shops that ran VMware Horizon View, where you would need like for like licensing for both sites, and you'd have your kind of, call it your standby VDI cluster in a geographical space, but it's fully licensed and kind of at the ready, just in case you needed it. There's some licensing advantages there from a cost perspective, from a OpEx model that can be very beneficial. And then the single pane of glass. How does that look for you? How are you managing your different VMware local workloads? Azure Arc for VMware is an interesting solution, especially if you have kind of, hey, I'm sticking with VMware, I'm sticking with my skilling in that area, I'm going to have on-prem workloads, I'm interested in AVS. How can I leverage some of the features around AVS and what Microsoft provides to help me manage and maintain my on-prem footprint here? That's where Azure Arc comes into play. Getting that in place, you can start using Defender for antivirus, which is very nice for consistent AV experience management. Identity and access management tools come into play here. Patching, general patching and updates come into play with Azure Arc. We've seen it be very successful, especially customers who know they're in a hybrid environment. They'll be in a hybrid environment for the foreseeable future, right? I know we have a couple blog posts out there about how to maybe not be in that hybrid world forever, but maybe it's a longer term play just based on contracts, the business, finance, hardware investments, whatever it might be. There's ways and tools out there that can kind of make that experience a little easier, hopefully for just your seamless end user experience, but also for IT professionals who need to support that type of hybrid environment. So lots of benefits, things to consider, just from what AVS can do for you. From a how we do this and what our experiences have been. So first of all, we like to team Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF for short, is Microsoft's framework that they put together just on overall cloud adoption from a holistic standpoint of Azure, not just AVS. But we like to follow the Cloud Adoption Framework and also mix it with some of our best practices and kind of lessons learned from the field. And hey, what's worked really well, what maybe hasn't so much, tweak the process, things like that. These are some of the core phases that we like to take customers through. Once you've made that decision, yep, I'm going AVS. I'm switching from a CapEx to an OpEx model. We talk about these geographical needs. We get into the phase one discovery and assessment, right? We're looking more at what you're doing today. We're helping you do sizing, which is very important before that request is put in with Microsoft to provision the initial cluster. Networking comes up pretty heavily in this phase too. How are you connecting? What's your footprint like today in Azure, if any? What's in place? Is it greenfield? What's the best practice? What's your overall, on-prem hub and spoke type layout today, and how does this fit into that? That's all during the discovery and assessment phase before we even start building anything. It's kind of that measure twice, cut once type mentality, making sure everything's good to go. And we're following our plan in that discovery phase as we move in to kind of the further steps. Then you get into the solution design, right? We've done our discovery. We know what we're doing. We're going to build this in. We're going to build your AVS cluster into your environment. How's it going to go? Again, network connectivity is important here. Security is important here. How you protect your perimeter. How are you doing that today with offices or retail sites? Are you doing that in Azure today? Do you want to do that? What does that look like? Taking that in consideration for ease of management and putting that design in place. Then we look at, landing zone. It's kind of a vague term. Your Azure landing zone, if you're following CAF really closely, that's what they call the ready phase. You're building out that foundation. Think about a house. You got to have the foundation. You got to dig the hole, pour the concrete, rebar, all that good stuff before you start building on top of it. It's exactly what a landing zone is. We have some base settings. You get things in there so that as you grow and scale, whether that's short-term or long-term, that you're set for that. That you can take advantage of all the security tools that are out there, tack on other SaaS or PaaS solutions as needed, and of course that it can house the AVS clusters successfully. But getting that set up, and customers might be in different parts of that journey, right? We have customers that already have a pretty well-established landing zone, so it's kind of, hey, we're tacking this on right here, let's go. Others who are like, ooh, this is my first foray into Azure. I need a landing zone built. I need it to be set up. I need it to be maintained. I need, the billing knobs and dials ready to go, different subscriptions potentially. We can help get that all set up as well. Then we move into kind of the meat and potatoes here, testing and validation. We're getting the nodes spun up. We're starting to do some base configuration. We're following what's in the solution design to be able to get you to a point where you can see, I think the end of the step 4 here is I can see my AVS cluster within vCenter. I can see it. I can see my hosts. I'm ready to probably move some test workloads, we'll call it, maybe some low-end, less critical VMs out there, or if it's a Horizon VDI play, we're moving maybe a couple desktops around, getting those out there, starting to test it, play with it. We can do some load testing. We can do some latency testing. What's the performance like? Maybe your IT staff is starting to mess with it. If it's VDI related, maybe you're getting some, a POC of people like, hey, they're IT friendly. You move their desktops out there. Hey, backend change. We want to know what your experience is for a period of time, a couple days, couple weeks, whatever that might look like from overall timeline. But you start to get a feel for that during that testing and validation phase before you get to number 5, where, okay, we're moving workloads now. We feel good about it. Everything's stable. It's fully integrated into our environment. We're going to either migrate workloads out there. We're going to replicate if we're doing DR and start putting your workload weight out there. If you're evacuating a data center or whatever that might be, this is where, hey, you start seeing those workloads from your on-prem VMware cluster move to that AVS cluster and get into a point where, kind of the end there is when all the workloads are off and you start, first turning down some of the hypervisor a little bit, right? You probably let that go for a little bit before you start powering off physical equipment at that layer before you start unracking gear. There's kind of some fun pictures out there of those data center evacuations where, the van that's pulled up to the Colo parking lot is full of what used to be millions of dollars worth of equipment. And now your business is still running fully cloud-based and hopefully users didn't even know the difference, right? Your general frontline worker had no idea where their workload used to live, where it does live. All they know is they can get to their apps, they can do their job. Then lastly, handoff and closure, right? Exit from that project. Make sure we go through some checks and balances just to make sure you have documentation, tips and tricks on general management. Again, that's kind of light in this area because if you're already a VMware professional, it's whether it's VMware on-prem, in the cloud, whatever it is, it's still that same tooling. So that's sometimes a little less. There's not necessarily a net new skill here to need to button up. And then what's not in here, Emergent does offer ongoing run operate services from managed and support services if there's ever the need for, hey, you know what, I need you guys to stick around and maintain this for me, and be a little closer at the ongoing support type of engagement versus heavy lift of workload migrations into AVS. We can send it out after. That link there talks about, sorry, Tom, I jumped the gun on you. That link there at the bottom talks more about CAF in general. If you just Google Microsoft CAF, it'll take you to the landing page and give you hours and hours and hours of reading. But we've got a couple posts and things that break it down, and there's actually a podcast coming out soon, specifically on CAF, 45-minute discussion. So if you're interested about that, let us know. But that's how we like to take people through it.
Awesome. So I want to take you through some reference architecture. A couple items I'm going to touch on are a little bit of a rehash of what Charlie had talked about. I'm going to go step maybe just a little bit further in on a couple items. And again, if there's any questions about what you're seeing here, what we've discussed, please throw them in the chat. Happy to go over it. So just like Charlie said, I like to break these deployments down into 4 different phases, essentially. First, we're talking about planning. That's network, resources, region. How are you going to manage it? Are you going to be putting VDI on here? So is that Citrix? Is that Horizon? What are you going to be doing with that? The reason why that's important is there's a couple different SKUs available for you depending on what region you're in. I'll get into that in just a minute. After that, we talked about deployment, such as the lead time to getting your deployment and all of the information that you'll need actually during the deployment of the solution. Then we go into post-deployment. How do you get access to it? What type of networking do you have? Do you have, like Charlie said, existing Azure infrastructure or on-premise infrastructure that will need to have access to this? What is backup, DR, and as we talked about, potentially using Azure Arc and monitoring for this environment. And then some third-party tools that we'll touch on briefly as well. So when we talk about resource planning, a few things you should know. They have kind of a small, medium, large t-shirt size for this, depending on the region that you're in. You have what's called the AV36, and that is going to be for your general workloads. And then it goes up to 52 and 64. And again, with each one of these, you're going to get more RAM, more storage, and more cores. Now, there is a minimum commitment and also a maximum as well to this. So the minimum is 3 nodes or 3 hosts from Microsoft clustered together. And the reason for that is going to be high availability and storage. They're going to be using vSAN on there. Not to say that that's the only storage option. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they're using that, and that's why you're going to have a minimum of 3. And although the best practice, and I'm going to recommend this as well, is that you go with 4 nodes. So please make sure that you're looking at the type of workload that you're going to be putting on here prior to going and making this request. And as Charlie mentioned before, this infrastructure is through a request through Microsoft. I've helped many customers go through this process of getting the equipment, requisition done with Microsoft, ask for it to make sure that the capacity team has what you're looking for out in the environment. Once we've done that, we also have to talk about networking again, right? So if you have, for example, a simplistic network design need. So in your AVS out in the Azure cloud, it just needs to reach back to on-premise. Maybe there's some domain controller replication or light apps, or your users are going to come from the office through that VPN tunnel up to Azure. That is supported at this moment in time. However, if you have the need for example, stretched private clusters, if you have a need for NSX to work, you're going to use VMware SRM for your replication. they're going to be requiring you to use the express route. So please, in the planning phase, kind of keep that in mind about, do you need to be working with your local provider for an Azure Express route point of presence? For HCX though, they do support site-to-site VPN for HCX replication, which makes it a nice, easy jump into. So again, it kind of gets back to the conversation where we do that discovery and we do that designing phase with our customers to kind of figure out what is appropriate for them. In a lot of cases, though, we do find people who say, we're going to be using AVS as our new VDI infrastructure. Let's take that as an example. And then we're going to put our servers off of our VMware straight onto Azure native. No problem with that. We do put in, as you can see on the picture here, that express route. That gets provisioned on Microsoft's side, nice and quick, to connect up both your AVS, connect up your Azure, and then through Azure vWAN Hub, we use that site-to-site tunnel, or again, if you need that express route, back to your on-premise and get that connectivity set up for you. When it comes to the post-deployment process, as mentioned before, you have Azure Monitor, but all of your other solutions are going to work. So if you have things that are tied into vCenter, whether you're a Logic Monitor user, if you're going to be using Azure Sentinel to pull logs or other tools, they're going to be working just fine for you. But we also care about backup. So whether we're talking about Commvault, whether we're talking about Veeam, you're going to have access to those softwares. But Azure native solutions are going to be another benefit here, where you're going to find access to Azure backup as well. And on the DR side, of course, Zerto and Veeam as well, but then or Rubrik as well is involved. You can also get Azure Site Recovery too. So then you have an option to not necessarily have two VMware clusters, but if you need to, that's not going to be any issue, right? So it just depends on how you're using your resources in the cloud. A couple other items to keep in mind too, since this is a first party or a first class citizen in the Azure infrastructure world, you're going to start seeing a lot of the Azure infrastructure coming in and being natively supported as well. So there's enhancements coming throughout this year that will bring a lot of things. Right now, they're previewing Azure Elastic SAN. You can already get NetApp storage for these units as well. So if you have needs for really large storage or different performance tiers beyond the vSAN, you can do that. And Pure Storage is another company too that also supports the AVS solution. A couple other things to keep in mind as well. The VMware HCX is the enterprise version, which is nice. So it comes with the full feature suite there of HCX. So you don't need to worry about that. And then just to touch on Azure Arc a little bit, Azure Arc does also support bringing, again, that single pane of glass where you can see both your on-premise vCenter in Azure, your Azure resources, but also your AVS resources there as well. So you're going to be able to use that Azure monitoring to get telemetry. You're going to be able to manage, create policies across all of your machines. Patching, as mentioned before, was a really big piece of that. Getting that Sentinel logging as well. All of that's very important. So again, when you are in AVS, you do, of course, get the power of a lot of the VMware solution pieces that you're already used to, which is typically the selling point for wanting to go there. The team needs to move. We need infrastructure now. We have bad infrastructure on premise or need to get out of the data center, on and on and on. We can move this up to Azure VMware Solution and then maintain the knowledge base there while you make a transition to Azure Native, if that's something that you want to do, or run both. With that said, I'm happy to hand it back over to the team.
Alex, I've got one question, Jeremy. Can you bring your own subscriptions and then transition them to Azure VMware subscriptions?
Are we assuming, apologize, a little clarity, are we talking about VMware subscriptions or are we talking about Azure, like the Azure subscription itself?
Yeah, so bring your own VMware subscriptions and then transition those to Azure VMware subscriptions.
That is probably a simplistic two-part answer to this, and it sort of depends on what your current licensing is right now. It depends on what you've negotiated with the people providing that, but there are licenses that allow you to move that up to the cloud. So in those cases, work with us or your license provider to ask that, but you can do that if needed.
Okay. Great. No, thank you guys. Do we have any questions from folks in attendance that they want to put in the chat? We've got some time. I'm so happy to answer any existing questions that you guys have.
While people are thinking, Tom, I'll actually give a good kind of example of kind of one customer journey. They had a need, kind of piecing it all together. They had multiple needs. They needed to do some DR type replication to meet some requirements. They needed a VDI DR site, and they were kind of stuck, and they needed it like now, the infamous now type scenario. Well, what they did was they did a few things. One, they leveraged AVS to take advantage of VDI DR cluster, spin it up, going through what we've talked about. Okay, checkbox, we know what we're doing there. From a sheer, I just need to replicate my data and protect it. I don't need RPO, RTO right now. I just need to have a second copy of it. They leveraged Azure ASR, Azure Site Recovery. I'm just getting the data safely replicated. Doesn't mean it's usable immediately, but I have the data. If there was a disaster, massive hardware failure, whatever it was, I have my data and it's being current. Okay, that was kind of their first, check boxes, get me some breathing room type scenarios. And then they're like, okay, now I want to start thinking about making Azure as a whole, not just AVS, but the entire Azure ecosystem, my prod environment. So now I have some breathing room. How do I do that? I also have I don't know, I think they have like a 7 or 8 months left on their colo contract. How can we kind of reverse into that timeline to be able to do that, to get off my on-prem gear? Okay, so between their on-prem workloads, what they're doing, and with AVS, we're able to start, doing more traditional native Azure migrations, whether that was simply like a lift and shift into an IaaS type scenario, whether that's a PaaS offering they wanted to take advantage of. That was very beneficial. The networking was all built out, for this hybrid go-between. And then they're starting to think about what that next evolution is with the geographical redundancy, that I'm not going to have and operate my own data centers. I'm going to have my prod be in, call it North Central, and then my my DR be in South Central. So that's, I think, keep me honest, I think that's somewhere in the Chicago area for North Central, and then down in somewhere in the Texas area for South. So geographical redundancy achieved. Those are connected on the Microsoft backbone. Extremely low latent replication potential there. They kind of mirrored up their business dependencies on what they needed to do from a timeline perspective in what their requirements were with their contracts and with their kind of cloud journey, while leveraging not only the AVS solution we're focusing on here, but other components of Azure. Looks like we got a few questions here. How are Azure VMware subscriptions immune to the price increase that on-prem subscriptions have? I can certainly start, but Tom, Jeremy, chime in a little bit. It's really the difference between the OpEx and CapEx model. You can sign up for AVS on a month-to-month basis. It's more expensive than doing even a 1-year reserved instance, but given that it's month-to-month and it's baked into that OpEx model, and the way the partnership between, because this is VMware on Azure, it's a partnership between Microsoft and VMware. Whatever they have behind the scenes, the pricing is consistent. It's bundled in with the nodes, with the runtime, the licensing. It's all kind of got this wrapper around it, which makes it enticing, right? Especially with what's going on. Tom or Jeremy, anything to add there?
Yeah, and maybe a point of clarity too, just as I'm thinking about the previous questions and the questions being asked here too. When it comes to the VMware solutions, you are getting, like you said, the VMware licensing baked into the cost of what's being deployed out there. So again, like getting the vCenter and NSX and all the rest of that. So licensing is part of that run rate. Microsoft does this across most all of their assets, where they provide reserved instances, and that reserved instance is a bit of a back scratching situation. where you make a commitment to 1, 3, or in this case 5 years, Microsoft is going to go ahead and give you a discount on your run rate month to month. Of course, is going to go down for that commitment, but then also what you're going to get is you're going to get your price lock at that point. That's part of what your reserved instances does to you is it says you're going to pay this much over the months. And so whether we're talking about Azure native infrastructure, Azure storage, or compute resources, infrastructure, files, whatever, right? Like you can get RI across the board. That's part of that lock-in piece right there to help with that situation. And then to that last question, then when you're talking about VMware specifically, so we're not talking about Horizon or any of the other things that you might be using there, where you might be buying CALs and OS and the rest of that. A lot of that stuff will still apply, but when it comes to the infrastructure, ESX and the clustering and the add-ons for that, that's all in your run rate at that point. And so you wouldn't need to be going through and working on getting that type of licensing renewed. But if you have anything else that is necessary to run your business, you need to be license compliant on, and again, like I said, very commonly Horizon or other feature sets that you might be doing. But licensing, just as a note, is kind of an interesting piece where, again, you might be looking at something that is consumption based as potentially a big positive. There's, a certain breaking point where maybe going with Rubrik or Veeam makes sense in some cases, but Azure Native might make sense in a lot of other cases where you're getting charged, for example, with just say Azure Site Recovery for doing DR purposes. You're able to take all of the VMs and replicate them. Yep, it's through a different tool than using VM, the VMware tools. But it's a flat rate across the virtual machines and a little bit of storage. And it allows you to drop a Veeam license, or it allows you to drop Zerto or Commvault or whatever else that maybe you're not using the whole piece, right? So the benefit to going to the cloud, and you face this even with Azure VMware Solutions, is that when you buy, it's that stair step instead of that straight consumption, where I'm looking at the saying, I'm going to need 4 nodes because I can use 80% of the capacity on this cluster. And then I have some unused infrastructure with AVS, to provide if a node needs patching, or, if there's an equipment failure or something along those lines, you have that HA capability there. You take a look at your other solutions though, and as mentioned, those third parties, and say, is there a way to potentially move into using a consumption based and seeing those bills a lot of times go down quite a bit? So where you might be keeping AVS for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier, the benefit to your organizations, you still have other ways to potentially trim cost off by looking at some of those first party solutions as well.
Good.
Yeah, I think the next. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to get to Robert's question.
Yeah.
Is it necessary to keep VMware subscription if we move to Azure Cloud? Is there a migration path to go from VMware to Azure? I'll start probably a little higher level, and then Jeremy fill in the gaps and pull it down a little bit where needed. But the short answer is yes, there is a migration path, and 2, looking to no longer be married to the VMware solution set, there absolutely is a way to go, and you don't even need to have that. And it can be twofold. You can go from, to AVS and then to just native Azure, or we see this common too. I'm just going from on-prem VMware, VMware workloads, moving them into purely Azure workloads. There's some tooling out there that Microsoft has made that is extremely helpful, both from a diagnostics, collecting data, helping run cost estimates of what that'll look like. That can be very beneficial. That kind of come in those that kind of plan and strategy type phases, and then actual movement of workloads. There's a few different tooling sets out there. We have a few of our favorites that we like that can help actually move those workloads with little to no interruption, depending on the workload itself, size, scale, latency, What are we moving it to? You'll commonly hear the phrase, it's either 5 or 6 R's. Am I rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting, retiring the workload? And that's part of that kind of early phases of CAF, going back to the cloud adoption framework that they want you to go through to review your workloads before you move into Azure. And honestly, that kind of applies whether you're going from on-prem into the cloud, or if you're going from an AVS type solution to, I'll call it native Azure, because you are moving the workloads, and I there's definitely opportunity there to transform. I've had some customers say, lift and shift is great, but you're still running the VM. I'm still responsible for it. It's not a huge change, and they're right. It's just where it lives, right? It's no longer living in my data center on a gear I own. It's up in Azure, but some of that transformation really comes when you can take advantage of past solutions or go full SaaS. But different applications have different requirements. What is supported by the line of business application provider? Those are all things that get accounted for, kind of that can lead to where that workload lives in Azure. Hope that explains it a little bit. Jeremy, anything to fill in the gaps there?
Yeah, I mean, the team and I, right, we're working on many, many different transitions, and I'll tell you that we do run across the occasional Hyper-V farm out there hosting this infrastructure, but most of the time it's VMware. There's no issue moving VMware workloads up to the cloud through the transformation tools. Our team does, following the CAF framework, the due diligence to do discovery and work through that transition with our clients. And so what a lot of times people are doing, and there's some total cost of ownership calculations necessary, but a lot of people are saying, here's what I'm going to stop doing. I'm going to stop buying licensing. I'm going to let this infrastructure retire. So I'm going to move it to the cloud. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay for my Windows Server licensing through the run rate of my virtual machine. And items like domain controllers and SQL servers, and maybe even some of your VDI, they'll put reserved instance on there to get that discounted rate, leave them running 24/7. And a lot of the other infrastructure, maybe it only has another year or two or whatever, maybe even just a couple months of life left in it, but we had to get rid of that infrastructure on-prem. No problem. You get it up there, you pay for 3 months, you retire that, like you said, to a PaaS platform or a cloud platform that solution might be provided by. And so the path from VMware, whether you decide to go into AVS or you decide to go straight from on-prem, does exist into the cloud without any problem. And some people are viewing AVS as an extension of their data center now. Immediate compute, storage, and networking, stretch, DR, the way they look at it now, which is a great way to look at it. Natively just integrates in, and there's just another vCenter in, to view. Here's your cluster. We don't care where the resources go. They can go here, they can go there. Whereas a lot of the customers might be looking at this just saying, I am not prepared because we're going through a major ERP upgrade right now to deal with this, but I want to be out of the data center. What do? You can get AVS for 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, or on for 6 months if you want to, on that month-to-month services. So you can go and do that, switch over, and then those Azure native, or even if you have, again, we talked about third-party Zerto tools, right, to do those transitions. For me personally, the Azure migration tools, that's what we like to use. It follows our frameworks. Our teams know it well. We're very successful with doing those transitions. And so we can go and stage right out into the cloud all of their software, test it out ahead of time, and do those transitions up to the cloud. So there is definitely paths depending on where you want to go, whether this is long-term or short-term for these types of solutions.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like, AVS is a great bridge to allow you to, make some different decisions, re-architect a bit, and then, once you're comfortable within that space, then move more into the full kind of Azure native environment. So
yeah, that's what we've seen. It's a great solution, and it can be a I need this now type of need, where we've seen a lot of success. Absolutely.
It sure beats waiting months to get equipment to say that, from requisition or ticket time to actually deployment. And like you said, it's typically less than a week. I mean, that's a pretty nice deal.
That's pretty cool.
It's not bad. Any other questions from the audience while we got 10 minutes? Okay, doesn't look like it. Again, thank you all, very much for attending. We hope it was informative. We'll send out, an email just soliciting some feedback on the topic that we covered here. See if there's anything you want to have some follow-up discussions on. But we're very appreciative again of the time you gave us, and hope again that you learned something new here today. So thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.